In 2016, a grad student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison died by suicide, and we learned later he was suffering under an abusive advisor. But UW's problem with academic bullying goes much farther than that one tragedy. A Wisconsin State Journal investigation uncovered 9 employees investigated in the last 6 years for hostile and intimidating behavior, and raised questions about some of the university's efforts to fix the problem. I'm joined by higher education reporter Kelly Meyerhofer. She reported the series. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Why don't we start with describing some of the types of bullying, the academic bullying that you found through your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, bullying has a fairly broad definition, and it's definitely open to different interpretations. The university defines it as behavior that's so pervasive and severe that it affects people's ability to do their work. So there's many different forms: shouting, belittling, ridiculing. There's also kind of more subtle forms of this type of behavior, like threatening to pull students' funding, refusing to review their papers, giving bad job references. So there's kind of a wide range of behavior that falls under this term bullying.
And some of this rose to the level of really impacting students' careers farther down the road. You know, graduate students who are trying to get PhDs or go into the careers that they're studying for, and some of them just, it was so bad they didn't go into their chosen careers at all. If you want to kind of expand on some of those examples of kind of the worst examples that you found in talking to former students.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, bullying is a problem that, you know, a lot of students, they either suffer through in silence for years, or they just drop out of academia altogether. Some students I talked to, they decided to just get their master's and move on, and not pursue their PhD, which is another 3 to 4 years. Some of the worst examples of a lab that I looked at, you know, a student said that, actually not a student, a postdoctoral researcher had tried leaving the lab because it was such a hostile situation, applying for others across the country, and he said that his advisor gave really bad references and he couldn't get a job elsewhere, and then the advisor was like sabotaging his research and forcing him to write a paper using falsified data. And this is a postdoc, so they had already gotten their PhD, and he's now a carpenter.
Is it tough to find a clear violation of bullying? Obviously, you know, UW has its policy, and does that kind of make it tougher to investigate than, say, other forms of harassment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I talked to some experts, and, you know, bullying in general is, you know, it gets far less attention than sexual harassment and sexual assault has gotten, you know, with the Me Too movement. I think there's been very egregious cases I've looked at, like the student's suicide and, you know, this one lab where the postdoc is now a carpenter. I think those were pretty clear-cut for the university to say this is bullying, and it's you know, we do not tolerate this. I've looked at other cases that were not investigated at the highest level, that were investigated at a lower level, and you know, they found some forms of behavior, but those professors are still working at the university, and UW put in place like monitoring and other sort of actions to try to get them to change their behavior instead.
I want to read a quote from your reporting that I found especially important. So, to quote, in almost all of the cases in which responses from the accused were included in UW-Madison reports, the individuals denied the accusations, blamed others, or questioned the investigative process, end quote. You had a lot of conversations with some of these professors accused of bullying. What stood out to you most when interacting with them?
Well, I only actually talked to one of the professors that agreed to an interview. He was investigated twice for this type of behavior, once in 2012. He was sent to sort of HR training, and then again in 2016. You know, he told me he denied a lot of what was in the report and said it wasn't true, and, you know, these were a few students that weren't really academically performing to that standard. So he denied some of the accusations. He admitted to some other behaviors. He said, you know, I used to shout at students, but I don't do that anymore. And he said he has since changed his behavior.
And I guess part of that question, I know there's another professor you had emailed with, it seemed from the reporting, eventually declined an interview, but there were some emails with.
Yeah, and she really attacked the investigative process and said that this is a case where she had been bullied. She was not the bully. And she also brought up that she was sexually harassed, and she's from Canada, and she said, I was discriminated against because I'm a foreign faculty member. So yeah, that's sort of how she responded.
You talked to a lot of students, obviously, as part of this report, as you kind of corroborated what you found in the investigative reports and such. Do you get the sense that this problem is wider spread than, say, the formal investigations might let on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I asked the university how many formal investigations at the highest level. They've had 8 in the past couple of years. So that's sort of really egregious behavior. I mean, I've sort of identified those cases. But I mean, after publishing these stories, I hear from a lot of people, that say, I was bullied, I was harassed, it was a horrible situation. In talking with some of them, I don't know if their case rises to the level where someone would be fired for that sort of behavior, but it is something that a lot of people, I think, are struggling with on campus.
Now, this isn't a unique problem to UW or this campus, or, kind of put it in perspective of what other universities might experience and whether it's actually even given the same kind of spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to UW, they will definitely say that they are far ahead in trying to tackle this problem than other universities. If you look at Big Ten schools, their policies are kind of like vaguely folded into behavioral policies. UW has a very specific policy on this, and a website that sort of lays out, like, here's how you can report the problem, here's what offices you should go to try to get help. So from their perspective, they're really trying to confront the problem head on, but they also acknowledge that, there are cases and this sort of behavior will persist.
Last question for you, just in your own perspective, review, thinking back on your reporting, what stands out to you as, like, this I feel like is the most important part?
What strikes me as the most important?
Yeah.
Well, I've talked to a lot of students who were in really bad places. I mean, it was kind of soul-crushing to just talk to so many students who were contemplating suicide or seeing counselors. This is a problem that really is kind of hidden in the shadows, and I'm just glad that, people on campus are talking about it more.
All right, Kelly, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. As the U.S. prepares to welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees, will Madison be tapped to help? That's next.